Hello and welcome to this pre-recorded session for the IEEE ISTAS23 Public Interest Technology Workshop. This year's theme is dedicated to PIT for Innovation in Global Development. My name is Roba Abbas and I am the chair of the workshop, and I'm joined by my collaborator, Professor Katina Michael. Together, we are honored to host Dr. Michael Eldred. Before introducing our distinguished speaker, I would like to briefly introduce the PIT workshop. Public interest technology can be defined as both a philosophy of design and development and an outcome, for example, product, process, procedure, or policy. The hope is to harness technological potential in the interest of justice and the public good. As such, PIT programs and projects vary, but all are bound by the underlying goal of advancing the interests of the public. PIT for innovation in global development and other settings must therefore acknowledge the significance of context, the local community, and a range of stakeholders in the PIT socio-technical ecosystem. The PIT workshop endeavours to advance interdisciplinary and transdisciplinary thought to address local, regional, national, international, and grand societal challenges. And with that introduction, and on behalf of my co-chair and the PIT organising committee, it gives me great pleasure to welcome our speaker for today, Dr. Michael Eldred. Dr. Michael Eldred is an Australian philosopher, mathematician, translator, and musician currently living in Cologne, Germany. Dr. Eldred's academic qualifications include Bachelor of Science with honours in pure mathematics, Master of Science in pure mathematics, Master of Arts, preliminary with first-class honours in philosophy, and a Doctor of Philosophy in philosophy, all from the University of Sydney. A selection of Michael's recent publications include Algorithmic Control of Movement in Time, Abolishing Even Ourselves, The Digital Age, Challenges for Today's Thinking, and Movement and Time in the Cyber World, Questioning the Digital Cast of Being, among others. We're delighted to welcome Dr. Michael Eldred today to present his paper for the ISTAS23 Public Interest Technology for Innovation in Global Development workshop. The paper is titled An Invisible Global Social Value. Welcome, Dr. Eldred, and thank you for joining us.
Yeah, thank you for the invitation. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights sets out purportedly innate rights for how each and every individual human being ought to be estimated and valued by others and treated accordingly. Article 3 already proclaims that, quote, everyone has the right to life, liberty, and the security of person, whereas the right to own property, either individually or in association with others, is relegated to Article 17, but is registered nevertheless. One could therefore rightly claim that the rights of life and liberty have priority over the rights of private property. The dignity of the individual human stands front and centre, and dignity pertains to the appropriate esteem and estimation an individual ought to enjoy in social interplay. Life and liberty are only lived out as a freedom of social movement acknowledged by others and especially the state. Association, pure and simple, is the realm of civil society, whereas power interplay with the state, society's political instance, introduces socio-political aspects. I have now very briefly mentioned some of the values that are highly visible globally and have their origins in Western ways of thinking that may go against the grain of non-Western cultures. The title of my talk, however, promises an invisible global social value, one that is not on the radar screen of today's discourse. The invisibility of this invisible value does not exclude, but rather includes that it is also as plain as day. That it can be both invisible and visible derives from the distinction between implicit and explicit understanding. Hermeneutic phenomenology aims at bringing the hermeneutic as into the light of explicit conceptual understanding that articulates the mode of being of phenomena such as human being itself. To do its work, this hermeneutic bringing to light has to dispose of misunderstandings, cover-ups, and illusions regarding the phenomenon in question, that have accumulated over the centuries and hold a tight grip on our mind. The mind here must not be conceived as individual consciousness, nor as a collectivity of such, but as the ineluctably shared understanding of elementary phenomena of an historical age, such as our own modern age. The conception of the individual conscious-willed subject is, paradoxically, one such shared elementary understanding, namely of the individuated human being as such. The hermeneutic as through which this historically specific conception of human being has been cast is almost entirely invisible in our own time, including in philosophy itself, which has been overwhelmed and ravaged by positivist and empiricist ways of thinking that have shut down the ontological difference. The same holds true for thingified exchange value. It will be readily admitted as an obviousness that certain things have value in exchange on the market, and also that this exchange value derives from their use value. If they are useless, they are also valueless on the market. The marketable goods and services as things have exchange value and are therefore a form of thingified value. That is straightforward, but does not seem to warrant the introduction of the artificial jargon of thingified value, just because some things have value. Note that a thing in this context is not restricted to sensuously palpable physical things. It will also be readily conceded that money as a means of exchange, as this thing has value and is therefore also a form of thingified value. Some philosophers claim that the thing called money has value only because we subjects agree collectively by convention to attribute value to it. This collective will is then conceived as a product of intersubjectivity. The phenomenon of thingified value and its many and various forms serves closer attention. The distinction between form and content is a commonplace of pedestrian thinking, but this usual signification belies the significance of the word form as a standard rendering of Plato's idea, or idea in Greek. The forms are the views or looks that the phenomena present of themselves to the human mind as the looks of being simply insofar as they are beings. The as here is the hermeneutic as that occupies the ontological difference between a being and its mode of being. Thus, for example, to conceive the human being as a species of animal is already to interpret the human being ontologically and in its beingness. Goods, services, and money, I have said, are forms or looks of thingified value that do not exhaust the phenomenon of thingified value itself, which has a whole range of interconnected forms of appearance. One could say that thingified value itself remains invisible behind its various forms of appearance. Thingified value itself is the medium that associates its bearers via the transformation of forms of thingified value, thus lubricating a specific kind of social rather than physical movement, demanding its own appropriate ontological interpretation. The investigation and analysis of successive transformations of thingified values lead to the uncovering of further value forms in a conceptually interconnected way. Here, I only name boldly the prime value forms that come to light during this investigation. 1, money as capital, wages, 3, surplus value, 4, variable capital, 5, fixed capital, 6, interest, 7, loan capital, 8, ground rent, 9, landed property, 10, profit of enterprise, 11, enterprise value. Read money capital. It should be noted that with the transformation of money into money capital, an inversion takes place, whereby money is no longer a means facilitating the exchange of one good for another, but the starting point of a circuit in which money is advanced in order to return augmented with a surplus that is generally called gross profit. The advanced capital is transformed into wages and productive capital in order to set up some kind of production process whose products, including services, are intended to be sold at a profit. These transformations of value form themselves in a circular movement have only a purely formal quantitative aim, namely the augmentation of thingified value, a movement called valorization or Verwertung in German. As such, this formal valorization movement is entirely indifferent to its content, i.e. to what is produced, how it is produced, and for whom. Although born and executed by human beings, in its formal indifference, the movement of valorization can scarcely be regarded as human or humane. The product must merely find a market on which it can be sold to realize revenue containing a portion of profit. Formal valorization is per se indifferent to whether the product is harmful to consumers or the environment. It is also limitless and senseless. It is senseless because its aim is solely the augmentation of thingified value. And it is limitless because there is no limit at which further augmentation would become senseless and cease. Wages. They are the form of thingified value through which living labor power, and thus employees themselves, submit and are subsumed beneath the formal movement of valorizing profit-seeking capital. Insofar, one can say that by hiring out their labor power to an employer, the employees thingify themselves for the sake of gaining wage income. Furthermore, wages paid are a cost, that is a deduction from the potential surplus value or gross profit. There is therefore at the core of valorization an inherent conflict, antagonism, and struggle between the employees and the character mask of capital over the level of wages and working conditions. This is the classic kind of class struggle. The gross profit generated by circuits of capital is divided up into further valued forms that form the basis of other kinds of class struggle. Wages, interest, ground rent, and profit of enterprise are the four basic income value forms flowing from the four income sources: the employee's labor power, the financier's loan capital, the landowner's land, and the entrepreneur's enterprise, respectively. These four income sources are borne by four basic classes of character masks that carry out the circular valorization movement. These four basic character masks, which may be regarded as individuals or associations thereof, vie with each other to earn their respective kinds of income in a competitive struggle I call the gainful game. Character mask is an appropriate term because the ostensibly underlying subjects are reduced to roles in a play, played out as a more or less strenuous, bruising, or vicious game that is taken out of their hands. The entrepreneur, either an individual or a company, has a key role to play because the enterprise organizes the production process of a circuit of valorization by bringing the factors of production together and setting them to work. The players engage in power interplays with each other over the dividing up of the total revenue generated by total social valorization. On the surface of society, this total appears disguised as gross domestic product that is taken by economists to be a measure of a country's economic strength and wealth. As spenders of their respective kinds of income, the character masks assume also the mask and role of consumers who are required to realize the value of produced goods and services as revenue for capitalist enterprises. By playing the gainful game, the players are unknowingly valorizing thingified value in its formal circular movement, a movement that remains invisible as such to the players because the medium of thingified value as such also remains invisible. The players in the gainful game are individualized by virtue of being dissociated. They are associated with each other in earning their livelihood only via their existential immersion in the medium of thingified value. This individualized dissociation and thus freedom from each other lies at the core of Western individualism. Instead of estimating what they can do for each other's benefit in an estimative interplay that is not thinly mediated, the players are immersed in competition with each other over gain. By virtue of its formal indifference and universality, the medium of thingified value is able to associate the dissociated players of the gainful game in a globalized economy. The players are exposed to its ups and downs, occasioned by disruptions to and dislocations in the underlying valorization movement. The ultimate cover-up for valorizing thingified value is its form of appearance as private property and its associating movement mediated by contractual intercourse. Each kind of income is privately owned and derived from the respective kind of private property. The contractual mediation of association is protected by the rule of law. Whether it be to earn or spend income, individuals are free to enter into many and various kinds of contracts. Owning property and exercising private property rights appears as the freedom of individuals living their lives in a market economy in pursuit of happiness. The formal nature of the freedom of individuals to earn and spend income translates as their freedom being only a potential. All that can be demanded and continually contested is that the conditions and rules of competitive play be fair. In affirming the freedom of individual property rights as a cherished social value, the dissociated individuals are in truth unknowingly affirming thingified value and its valorization as the highest value of societies associated by this associating medium that itself is covered up by the bland term free market economy. The individual freedom afforded by the dissociated nature of individuals associated by the medium of thingified value is duplicitous, since it is undergirded by a realm of compulsion dictated by global valorization and its vicissitudes. Individual freedom is therefore constricted by the very associating medium that enables it. On the other hand, today's globalized economy is enabled by and demands the free movement of valorizing value, a movement that is far more liberal than any relatively free movement of individuals across the globe. Formerly indifferent, limitless valorization comes up against the limits of exploitation of our finite earth that manifest themselves in countless ways. The compulsion to valorize never lets up, but remains obfuscated by insidious ideologies of individual freedom and economic prosperity. What remains invisible to environmental activists in struggles to prevent environmental degradation is that the earth itself has been subsumed under a specific value form, namely ground rent. It dovetails perfectly with overall global valorization. By remaining oblivious to this value form, the diagnosis of environmental depredations misses the mark. The dividing up of the Earth's surface into parcels of privately owned land has immense consequences for sparing the Earth from exploitation and degradation. No wonder that environmental protection policies come up against the massive resistance of private landowners interested in earning ground rent. Private land ownership also plays havoc with the age-old, culturally embedded practices of indigenous peoples on their land. The dispossession and massacres of the indigenous were and are driven by the gainful interests of landed property, surreptitiously aligned with valorization. Attempts to come to terms with today's pressing calamity of global climate change face fierce resistance, not only generally from income-seeking players in the gainful game, but specifically from landed property interests. In the struggle for a transition to a sustainable economy, we do not ask insistently enough what exactly we are struggling to sustain. Is it the sustained valorization movement of thingified value? Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Eldred, for that insightful and thoughtful presentation. There are so many questions that we can ask you. I think I will hand over to Professor Katina Michael for some immediate reflections and some questions. Katina.
Thank you so much, Roba, and thank you so much, Michael. Always a pleasure to hear you speak about the gainful gains and thingified value, which has become an ongoing theme of yours throughout many video presentations and also papers and writings. I'm always reminded of Jean-Paul Sartre when I hear you speak about the gainful gain and this playing and this interplay. I'm reminded of Sartre where he cites a cafe waiter whose movements and conversation are a little too waiteresque. He's moving about hoping that possibly he'll impress the customer and maybe he'll get a tip. His or her voice oozes with eagerness to please. Welcome to the cafe. But why does he do this or she do this? It's a little too precise, a little too rapid, a little too rigid, a little too forward. And I keep thinking about what's happened in the space of the personal with our interpersonal relationships, our one-on-one or our one-on family or friends. I think about what's happening in organizations today. I think about what's happening in nations and the world at large, and how aware people are that they do have agency and they do have freedom and choice. And so sometimes in the organizational context, someone may provide an outward appearance of values that they espouse to, but in fact, it's all too easy to succumb to whatever that mode is of that workplace at that time, of that leadership. And it's confronting when you say to people, is that the real you or is this the fake you? Which one is it? And what do you mean you had to make that decision and there was no choice? Just like the waiter in the restaurant moving around thinking he will please just to get that tip and just to impress his boss or her boss. And I keep coming back to the valorization bit because it all has to do with valor and perhaps the self even more than money. But it's such a root problem that you identify here that's very obvious to many of us. But my first question is, how much of this has to do with Sartre's bad faith in context of existentialism, and how much of it has to do with people feeling they have no choice?
Yeah, that's a very nice example from everyday life. The waiter who is putting on a kind of performance for the customer to be estimated as such and such, as a good waiter. And the aim is to get a tip, as you say. So that's a form of thingified value. So in that sense, the customer is a consumer, the waiter is the one providing the service and wants to be honored or esteemed through a form of thingified value. And I'd say, I wouldn't say that that is bad faith, but it is the way the gameful game is played, and you can take it as at face value, namely that is the game, that we are all involved in some way in earning an income, whether it be through providing a service or laboring, or whether it be by speculating on the stock exchange and anything in between. And okay, that is what is praised as freedom of the individual, to engage in this game of earning income with the appropriate means, which are all forms of private property. And what is not seen, this is the surface. And as Hegel shows us, if you try to work your way through Hegel, you see that he says the essence is hidden but must appear. And it appears in this sense, in this context, as the gameful game itself, which is played with these various forms of thingified value and people seeking their income and acknowledging each other, and they can be even polite, and they can be fair, or they can be unfair. But what the essence is, and this is what is just startling, is that it is a specific kind of movement that cannot be analyzed in the terms of the usual ontology of movement, which is always causal. This causes that, causes that, causes that. And you might have to break it down to statistical analysis of what is causing what is causing it. And I'm saying, no. This valorization movement demands its own ontology to be able to see what's going on. And that is what I think is missing in today's discourse.
Thank you so much. It's a great answer, and one I'll be pondering with Dr. Abbas, I'm sure. My second and final question has to do with this focus of the public interest technology area, and that if we do develop an ontology, perhaps we can actually act in the public interest without that fakeness, or without the valorization of the thingified thing or value, whether that's margins or profit or whatever it is that we currently seem to be worshipping in society. But it comes at a cost for those who have that message to advocate for the public interest, to remove the fake needs of people and think about the real needs of people. What is the process, Michael, that you see? How do people speak about this? How do they form an ontology? And perhaps what happens sometimes when the system that is dedicated to the gain for gain gobbles up the message, the voice, or the people who are trying to break away from the gain for gain? Is it really possible that that will occur in the future through PIT initiatives?
Who knows? But I think that, as far as I'm concerned, for me, it is a way of getting at the truth. And this truth is not known, it remains hidden. And what happens if this truth comes to light through an appropriate way of thinking? What then happens is something which cannot be predicted, but we can already make some connections when you talk about people's real needs, public interest technology for the public interest. You can already see that there's a connection there to the indifference of the valorization movement. Valorization as a purely formal, ever-repeating, limitless, and somehow senseless process is antithetical. It's simply antithetical. It is indifferent. It is indifferent. But it doesn't matter whether an enterprise like the cartels are selling cocaine or Coca-Cola or strawberries or highly nutritional food. It is a matter of indifference per se to the principle of movement. And anything that diverts from this indifference or makes it meaningful or has an appropriate content must come from outside. And that would I'd say is the area of public interest technology, is to fight for that, there are human beings who are interested in living well, and also they are interested, or they could be interested in doing things that are mutually beneficial for each other. So, and that is about as far as I'd go, because until it becomes very clear that this valorization movement is in the background, we totally underestimate the depth of our dilemma and predicament in the world. As long as the gainful gain is sold as the realm of freedom, as it is everywhere in politics, and it's just horrendous. You're having dust thrown into your eyes, and you're not seeing what is really going on underneath, and that we're all, in a certain way, suckers. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Michael. We'll be all reflecting on your presentation and the Q&A on behalf of Dr. Roba Abbas, the chair of the PIT workshop co-located with IEEE ISTAS23. We want to thank you. Thank you also to our organizing committee and all our reviewers. We appreciate you very much. Thank you.